webinar will give an opportunity for our SLEvA members, students in MNEs, members of APEA, EvalYouth Sri Lanka and participants to learn new experience in the field of monitoring and evaluation from our speaker, Laura. Thank you all of you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amal, for those opening remarks. Next slide. And now it has come the time when we have to welcome our speaker, Laura Hughston. Laura is M&E expert and consultant with extensive experience in development and humanitarian programs. Developed a range of intuitive and interactive child-centered methodologies, a passionate advocate for inclusion and child participation. We are glad to have Laura share with us experiences regarding letting children take the lead in M&E. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you very much. So if you would like, if you're ready, I'm happy to start presenting. Is that okay?
Yes, please, Laura.
Fantastic. So thank you everyone for inviting me, especially thank you to all of you who are now working in the evening. I know you've had a long day, and so I'm particularly honored to have you with us today to listen to this experience. And also thank you very much to SLEvA for arranging this and all the other amazing webinars that we've had the pleasure to attend and learn so much from. As mentioned, my name is Laura Hughston. My pronouns are she, her. I currently work with Care International, but the experience I'll be describing today comes back from the time I was working with Plan International UK. And I'll be talking about my experience in Cambodia as described. I hope I'm not speaking too fast, and I hope I'm understood, and perhaps my accent isn't too distracting for you, but if there's anything, do raise your hand or type comments, because I'm confident Julius will be able to take that up. So let me start first by mentioning that this experience I'm talking about today is now a little bit old. It's an experience that dates back to 2015. And one of the questions we have organizing this webinar is, why aren't we doing more of it? This experience was successful, so why don't we see, we've seen since engagement of children in M&E across the world. In West Africa, we've seen a few examples. UNICEF did some work in West Africa, and in Cambodia, Save the Children did some other experiences. But for the majority, the landscape hasn't changed much. As mentioned, a lot of M&E continues to be done on children. So children as object of being observed, asked questions, children as respondent, rarely with children participating fully, and almost never with children actually leading M&E activities. In this experience, we aim to find children who were real beneficiaries of the program that they were participating on. By real beneficiaries, I mean children who may have had some economic difficulties, may have had some impairments. They were not selected based on any particular skill or confidence or ability to speak or speak English. They were just normal, regular participants to the program, and the program did target some of the children who were more disadvantaged. The child evaluators were empowered to make all the important decisions in an evaluation. We were aware that evaluations evaluators do hold power, and it was a deliberate attempt to hand over that power to the children themselves. So all important decisions were made by the children who evaluated the program. They collected the data, they analyzed it, they returned their own evaluative judgment on each of the DAC criteria. And this was the first experience. There were a further 2 experiences that took place in Zimbabwe and then in Kenya. So the program, it was a multi-sectoral program centering on education, but encompassing a number of other themes important to the importance of education, changing attitudes, changing gender norms, particularly to encourage children and especially girls and adolescent girls to continue their education. The focus was on adolescent girls, so we're talking post-primary, and aiming to set the scene to enable girls to transition into secondary post-primary education after primary studies. And it focused on, as I said, gender norm, eliminating violence in school and corporal punishment, the economic barriers that were, of course, a major concern for many of the family. Accountability of schools and participation of children in decision making, as well as accountability in general and good governance, were some of the broader themes of the program as well. So why would we choose to ask children to evaluate a program? Well, first of all, children have a right to participate. It is a right to participate in all decisions and programs they participate in and decisions that affect their lives. We wanted to demonstrate, or at least verify, that they were able to do so. We also wanted to do it for accountability reasons. As you know, often in our annual reports or programs in INGOs, we say that we're going to dramatically transform lives of communities and children and their future. And we felt it was appropriate to ask them, did we do so? And is it welcome? Did you enjoy the changes? What else should we have changed? What should we have kept the same? So accountability towards the communities that we were affecting with our activities. We wanted to verify if we were able to access a different perspective, having children collect and analyze data. So would they hear different views and different opinions? And of course, we felt that it was important that the evaluation would be locally owned. So any recommendation, any suggestions for improvement, any finding that would be relevant in the local context and would be owned, so that it could be then adopted and worked on the following year. This evaluation took place on the 4th year of a 5-year program. So we still had 1 year in which we were able to incorporate some of those recommendations to improve the design and the program operation. Our questions at the back of our mind was it possible? Is it possible to really hand over control of it completely to children? And the second question, does it add value? So having children evaluating a program, does it add value? Do we get a better quality evaluation? Do we get different insights? Do we get anything that we can't get when we, for example, hire a consultant to do an evaluation? And on our shopping list, so something that we would have liked to have happened, but we didn't necessarily focus on, it wasn't a central goal for us, was to understand if by building the skills of children to collect data, analyze it, would it help them to make a compelling case in the future if they wanted to advocate for their own rights? Part of, as I said, part of the program was about building this confidence and increasing accountability, including accountability of state institutions, of schools, of communities. And so we wanted to see if we are truly building the leaders of the future, can we help them make a case that is inclusive of everyone in their community and not just advance what they want, but understand and make a compelling case for something that is relevant to all children in their community. So some ethical considerations are worth mentioning. Now, I'm sure you're all professionals, so you know about safeguarding, you know about all those things, and we're not going to go over those. But in addition, if you're going to allow children to lead their own monitoring and evaluation exercises, it's important to have a few considerations. One central for us was that children must attend school. These were children enrolled in school who did attend school, and a big part of the program was focusing on attendance and learning. And so we didn't want to take them out of school to participate in this exercise. Compensation was also a consideration, considering that a lot of these children were disadvantaged children economically as well, and in their, let's say, free time or time not at school, they often would have had chores, or they would have contributed to family business. And so we didn't want their participation in this exercise actually costing them something in one way or another, because there is an opportunity cost. And so we wanted to find a way to compensate that was appropriate. Obviously, the physical safety of children is important, and so we needed to balance their ability to move around and with making sure that their safety was considered. Protection of children as beneficiaries is another consideration. Of course, if you allow children to return an evaluative judgment about programs and activities of which they are beneficiaries themselves, you have to make sure that they won't be any retaliation, they won't lose out on services if, for example, they decide that a particular activity or a particular partner isn't doing their job very well, that there's not going to be any repercussion on them as beneficiaries of the program. And finally, the credibility of the evaluation was important for us. As I said, we aimed very much to empower children with the program, and we felt that if they returned an evaluation that then would get discredited, or any recommendation not taken up based on the fact that that's just the work of children, we are not going to do anything about it, well, that would have really disempowered them, and it would have gone against the spirit of the program. So it was really important to us that the evaluation, the result of the evaluation, would be a credible evaluation, one that could stand its ground on par with an evaluation conducted, if you want, by a consultant or a group of adult professionals. The methodology we used centered on allowing children to decide the questions, obviously understanding what the program, and they had direct experience of the program, but understanding the program, the theory of change, what it did, and then enabling children to ask questions from a range of stakeholders and return their own full assessment on all that criteria. To enable this, we developed some child-friendly data collection tools that help them trigger discussions and probe their respondents, as well as with some thinking around minimizing the need for note-taking as well, to lighten the load a little bit on them. There were also child-friendly data analysis tools or small exercises that would help them to reach those conclusions and to think about certain complex concepts that might be a little bit more difficult to explain just in words, bearing in mind often it was translated, and so translation was also a consideration. And visuals and rubrics to help come to those decisions and come to those conclusions. I will show in a minute a few examples of that. Just to add to this, that as part of their decision making, not only the data they collected, but they were also provided with child-friendly infographics. That is quantitative data. Children only were able to collect qualitative data. So to ensure that the evaluation would be a credible evaluation as the one that would be conducted by a professional evaluation team, we felt that it was important they also had quantitative data available, and so we used the program data, which included the outcome data, and produced some child-friendly infographics for them to include this information in their judgment and assessment. Now, here are a few examples of the children in action themselves. Here's a young girl explaining one of the child-friendly data collection tools. This is the tool we call the Daisy, and it involves drawing a flower, putting oneself at the center, so me at the center of the flower, and then drawing different petals of different sizes, depending on how important something is. So it could be about school experience or different activities, different sectors that children participated in to different levels. So asking the respondent to draw a flower with petals of different sizes to explain how important, how prevalent, how central something was to their experience. Here's another one. This is one of the most popular is we call them confidence snails, and there are pictures of a snail gradually coming out of its shell. And we use this to ask about confidence, about speaking in public, speaking to authorities, making a case for something that is important, either for oneself or for a whole community or for the school in public. Another tool that we taught the children to use is simply designing a pie chart, again, to ask respondents to tell us about how important or relevant something is to their lives or themselves. So the proportion of something in relation to the whole, the importance of the quality of education, for example, to a life, or the importance of economic barrier in making the decision to continue with education, and so on. And here again, we see a girl leading a focus group discussion with other girls. Here a boy is asking other boy respondent to use what we call a T-frame, and that is two axes, positive and negative, and a central axis representing the program, and asking respondents to tell us about positive and negative experiences or events that occurred during the life of the program, and place them closer or further away from the program, depending on how relevant, how important the program was in causing that event or being part of that event. So telling us positive or negative experiences they have. And that was a way of trying to capture a little bit the unknown events that could have happened, or that we may not have monitored because they were happening outside of our M&E data, not capturing data on it, but understanding positive and negative things that happened that are connected or not connected with our activities. Here's another example to how we facilitated discussion on equity, and showing a person carrying different loads, and asking children to tell us who belongs to which category, who is really crushed under an enormous load, who has a load and struggles a bit, and those who might be able to do well even with a little bit of a load on them, but not so important. And this is a tool that we use right at the beginning, but also to try and understand, when we were analyzing the data, to see the results that we've seen and the data we had collected, who actually benefited more, which of those three categories of people could be seen to have benefited most. And did any of these categories, any of those people move to another category as a result of the program, or as a result of other reasons? And this is an example of those visuals that we would use to explain some concepts. As I said, the children used the various data they collected, plus the data we provided, to analyze and assess the program across the full DAC criteria. So here, as obviously the criteria that I'm sure you're very familiar with. And to do that, we used rubrics. Rubrics are a way of describing different degrees of improvement or change across a whole section of the different criteria. We thought that instead of using levels as in 1, 2, 3, or 4, we felt that perhaps children would feel more conscious about their judgment if we use number, because of course children that attend school are used to being marked, and they maybe would have been reluctant to give a low mark to something, feeling that perhaps they might hurt our feelings, or that we or the partners would be offended. So instead of using numbers, we just used animals of different sizes. The bigger the animal, the higher the level of achievement. This was also used to then produce the evaluation. So the evaluation report essentially came up with a fantasy animal that is made up of the different body parts of those different levels of achievement. So the head would represent the relevance, the body would represent the results of the program, the front legs would represent the efficiency, whereas the back leg would be the effectiveness, the tail, as in something that is left behind, represent the sustainability, and then on the head we would put a feature that represents the equity. So by using this system, we would be able to then compare each piece of the body of the fantasy animal to a description in the rubric with examples, and understand how the children arrived at that evaluation and what their evaluation was of the program. In terms of a few learnings from the process, I would say children are definitely able to conduct evaluations, and they do add value. They can access information that we can't, in the sense of the way respondents speak and participate in focus group discussions, or how they respond, the actual things they say. There are some nuances and variances of things that we didn't get from our monitoring systems. So some new information that we didn't access before. The process is very empowering for children. Now, it's something that we didn't necessarily set out to do, but it was very visible that the children who participated as evaluators felt very, very empowered from the process. The children were entirely able to have high quality of analysis, rich and nuanced assessment. That was part of the concern, is would they just return a judgment that says yes or no, good or bad, and nothing. But they were very able to link together all the different pieces of information and to come with an evaluative judgment that it considers different perspectives. So they would say the girl said this, but the boy said that. The program achieved good results, but some people feel not enough, or feel that some of the results are against what they want. And so they were really able to really produce a nuanced, rich assessment that was based on the evidence that they had collected. And incorporating into that also the quantitative data. They were perfectly able to do that. And there were high levels of participation, particularly among children themselves, when the children were collecting the data, and among mothers. We noticed that focus group discussion lasted a lot longer, that they really wanted to participate. In some cases, we had children who could not be included in focus group discussions, because obviously you can only have a certain number of children participating in a focus group discussion, otherwise it becomes an assembly. And some of the children who were told, no, we didn't invite you to this and you can't participate today, they actually demanded that we run another focus group discussion so that they could also participate. So this high level of participation was actually very encouraging at a point in the program where we found that there was a certain level of respondent fatigue when we were collecting data. So thank you very much for your attention today. All the reports are available online. I'm very happy for anyone to contact me separately if you have any questions, or any specific questions if you want to pilot or try something similar in your own experience. But most of all, today is a great opportunity to listen from your experience, having your thoughts, hearing if there's anything that is a barrier to the participation of children, or to even allowing children to lead your own exercises of monitoring evaluation. What are your queries? What are your questions? How can we mainstream the participation of children much more, given that so many of the programs that we work in actually focus on children or are designed to build a better future for them. So thank you very much. And now if you have any questions, I'd be happy to.
Thank you, Laura. A very great presentation there. And now we are going to the question and answer session. The question and answer session. As we begin this session, I see several comments and questions in the chat bar. So we will go through them. The comment there from Sonam, involvement of children in M&E is long-term sustainability. However, I'm just curious to know if there were any criteria on age and grade / class of the children involved in evaluation.
Okay, that's a brilliant question. So the criteria was only that the children did attend school and participated, you know, they were in the target area where these activities were taking place. That was as a criteria in terms of their learning. So this ended up being children, the target for the program were children between 10 and 19 years old. Grade was not a factor. We asked that children were able to understand percentages. So we didn't ask necessarily for good math skills or English or anything like that, but just that they would be able to understand percentages. And as it happened, every one of that age group was able to understand percentages. And that was the only, if you want, technical requirement for the children to participate. They were children, they were regular, as I said, regular children that participated in the project. Some were a little behind in their schooling, some had failed some routine exams. And as we repeated this experience in different countries, the last country where I did this was Kenya, and there we had the youngest child evaluator who was 10 years old. And he'd actually missed a year at school. So schooling wise, it was the equivalent of 9 years old. And he was perfectly able to follow along and to contribute to this really well. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. Let me see about other questions.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you. Yeah, the age, the grade of the children. There is another question here. In the process of guiding children into evaluation of the program, doesn't that contaminate the child evaluator? Thereby possibly distorting the findings / results?
So as I said, the children, this was a multi-sectoral program, so all the children had been exposed to the program in different ways and at different levels. So some might have participated in some activities more than others. Some activities did target parents or teachers or other members of the community leaders. So the wouldn't have been one person that would have experienced the entire program. We had 10 child evaluators, 5 boys, 5 girls. And we wanted them specifically to have direct lived experience of what it was to be part of this program. The extent to which they participated in activities, that was entirely up to them. Could it invalidate their judgment? Yes and no, I suppose. It could invalidate your judgment if you're completely external. They did collect, they did run a number of focus group discussions with children, not only in their schools, but in other schools, in other localities. So they met other people, they talked to parents, they talked to community leaders, they interviewed partners, they interviewed teachers, they interviewed people from the Ministry of Education, they even interviewed our own staff and probed them quite hard because they were pretty good at asking questions. So as always, I would say in any evaluation, it's not so much the role of the evaluator themselves, it's the evidence that rends the evaluation valid or not. So for all their judgments, they had to substantiate it. They had to say, this is why we feel that this is the level of attainment. And this is the evidence, because this is what people have said, because the data, the quantitative data shows this, because we noticed that there was a difference between one group or another saying certain things, between this location or that location. So perhaps activities were implemented better in one area or another. So they were able to produce those kind of judgments. And I personally feel that it's the evidence that speaks more than whoever does the evaluation. I feel that way about all evaluations. It is the evidence. It's not, it's how you arrive at the judgment rather than who is producing that judgment, but that's my personal experience.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Several people have requested the link for the full report. Link whether the final report can be shared.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. And there is a question there on the selection criteria. And I want to combine that question on selection criteria with the question on the ethical aspect of child labor. Labor. So when this child is considered maybe the aspect of compensation, does that amount to the child working and this leading to child labor? And what would be the implications both on the child and in the community in terms of the legal aspects and the responsibility to nurture these children? Would that amount to empowerment or abuse? So if you can respond to those kind of questions.
Excellent point. Excellent point. So the first was regarding the selection of children. The selection of children was just based on their informed consent and willingness to participate, if they wanted to be part of it. And then, as I said, the selection criteria was children in the catchment area of the program who attended school, able to understand percentages, which meant everybody really, and then whether or not they were willing to do it and perhaps within reach from the central place where we were meeting to do this. Nothing more than that. And it was very easy to find those children. In terms of the child labor concern, I think we did have quite a lot of debates around that. And in the 3 different countries, there were 3 different ways that we chose to compensate the children. So the compensation was something that I felt strongly was important because we were taking their time and time that they possibly would have used for other productive activities, given that they were particularly disadvantaged children. Of course, there are child labor laws, and it's important not to do that. The compensation take various forms depending on what the country office was also advising was appropriate. So what we did is normally compensation might have been more in kind rather than money, providing them with school materials, for example, that they would need maybe for the following year at school, with the view that perhaps it would be an incentive for them to come back to school the following year, because we knew that obviously there were disadvantaged children and children at risk of dropping out. So those were the kind of forms of compensations that we provided. But the compensation is also, and the child labor is also a reason about not using children perhaps to collect quantitative data, because there might not necessarily be an additional value of doing that in terms of the data that is collected, and therefore it would have, I felt maybe it would have turned a little bit into exploitation. But it was also very clear that they were not compensated simply for participating in the program, because obviously that has its own risks if you start compensating people for attending or responding to our questions. So they were compensated for their times, and we wanted it to make clear that this was a project that they were entirely leading themselves, and therefore it was a semi-professional relationship we had with them. We were asking them for their judgment and asking them for a commitment, and we felt it was appropriate to compensate them. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Thank you for those responses. Yeah, great lessons there. But there is a related question here, whether the children selected undergo some form of training. Are they trained on how to do it?
Yes, certainly. We did train them as part of the process. So I did provide some training, a couple of days training, covering a range of things, including understanding the program, because as I said, they all would have experienced the program, but probably to varying degrees, each of them. So bringing them back together to try and understand what is it that this project is trying to achieve? How does it go about doing this? What are the activities? What are the expected results? We also had an exercise that I called shadow problem tree analysis, whereby we would ask the children to review our theory of change in essence and see if there were any elements missing, any things that we had not considered. And in all three examples, including in Cambodia, some relevant problems did emerge that the project had not even tried to tackle. So for example, migration was an element that was very relevant to maintaining enrollment in school. So many children, because of economic limitations, once they reach adolescence, they were under a lot of pressure to leave school and go and work, often migrate to nearby Thailand. And this was a problem that the children did raise with us, and that we had failed to consider in a theory of change. So the children were informed and inducted in what the project did, and asked their opinion, asked to prioritize what they thought were the changes that were more important, and then they would validate that with their respondent. They would be trained in collecting data, in facilitating group discussions, how to avoid, for example, one person speaking over everyone else, and all of that. And we were always there with them to provide advice as they were collecting data, so they weren't left alone. We were there. Obviously, the discussions would happen between themselves, but they knew that they could come back if they encountered any problem.
Thank you. A question on, can this be applied in orphanages?
Absolutely. Absolutely. A certain level of literacy, I think, is probably necessary. But as I said, it doesn't have to be a very huge amount, but obviously note taking and those things. And if you start recording and then I have to do transcripts or something like that, well, a transcript would be difficult anyway if you can't read and write. So I think for as long as there is a certain level of literacy, yes, certainly. And I would encourage you to do so.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And related to that question is, been the findings from evaluation used to advocate for the better or improve the situation of the children? So the situation now.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. As I said, they did return a rich, a nuanced assessment. So in Cambodia in particular, for example, it was very evident that the component of the program that focused on sexual and reproductive and health rights was not necessarily that great in the way it had been implemented, and it wasn't really leading to the results that we were expecting, and tweaks could have been made to that. So that was a key recommendation for us to take forward. And as I said, we did this in year 4 of a 5-year program. So we had a whole another year of implementation where we could incorporate that into our activities and improve on that. And we use that 5th year to change the things that needed changing. So absolutely.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's great lessons there. And someone is asking, what are some of the supports that are a must for children evaluators? And related to this question is whether there has been some adult harassment to these children.
No, there wasn't. That was initially my concern, that if we wanted to empower children to make decisions, they had to be free to make those decisions, and whatever those decisions were. Even if it was to say, if they wanted to say the program is rubbish and has had no results and actually it's damaging, we needed to be prepared to take that. As long as it's presented with evidence, we should accept whatever judgment they gave us. And I was very lucky to have colleagues and officers and partners that were all very willing to accept that, and they accepted it from the start. We will accept, as long as they provide a judgment that is based on evidence, we will accept whatever they say, and we will not get back at them. And it was quite clear that it was important to do that. For the evaluation reports, as I said, we use this animal to assess the different levels of achievement for the different DAC criteria. And that was also a way of anonymizing. So we never said, and even when there were disagreements, for example, about the level of achievement, we never said, and this child said this, that child said that. It was always either a collective judgment, or if there was a disagreement, we would say there was a disagreement within the team, but we wouldn't necessarily attribute a particular judgment to a particular child or a particular location or a particular event for that sense. So that way it was anonymized. However, I said to you that for the rubrics of the different levels of achievement, we used animals for fear that the children would feel that somehow by providing a negative judgment or an assessment at the lower grade would hurt or disappoint us, and they would be conscious of this and therefore kind of influenced into having to give us a positive judgment. In reality, that did not happen at all. It was a precaution that I'm guessing was totally unnecessary. And the reason for it is that obviously they came to the judgment at the end of the process, having collected data, having already had that experience that they truly were taking the lead. They were making the decisions. They could see that we were not telling them what to decide and how to do things. They could choose themselves. So by the time they came to make their own judgments, they were well empowered. And my sense is that they didn't really, they didn't ask for opinion. So when they were coming up with a level, say, on sustainability or accountability, they would never look at us and say, is this correct? Or do you validate it? They would just say, this is what we decided. We've decided because of this evidence, this proof. And they weren't really interested in what us as adults had to say in relation to it. So they really, were quite comfortable with their leading role, and they didn't feel at all that their judgment could be influenced in any way. In communities as well, they were a little bit protected, if you want, from, so that obviously the respondents, they were participated on a voluntary basis. We didn't force anybody to respond. Generally, from my experience, it's actually quite the opposite. So a lot of people were very surprised by how articulate and how probing their questions were. So especially towards the end, when they start interviewing our staff and our partners, my observation is that actually it was our staff that were intimidated much more than the children. You could visibly see a lot of adults being put under pressure. And yeah, I've seen quite a few teachers and school principals really sweat and finding the questions really hard, including our staff. So that didn't happen, but obviously it's important to have that consideration in mind if that could happen after the process, and what do we have in place to make sure that no harassment of the children happens afterwards. That it's a valid consideration to keep in our minds.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And that answers the question by Bob, who wanted to know the type of information that children can be able to access, which adults could not be able to access. So that is catered for there. There is a question here with a comment that the evaluation tools presented can really be used by adolescents. Can they also be used for evaluating activities and not only programs? This is by Paulina.
Absolutely. So Rob, an example of the type of information we access that we didn't access through adult M&E people. For one example is in Cambodia, that all our M&E data showed that all children felt that their teachers were very good. When we started having children asking the same information, actually more criticism of adults emerged. So there were a few comments such as the teachers, yes, they are good, but they could be more experienced, and, you know, hinting at the fact that perhaps even the knowledge level of the teachers did vary. And that criticism of adult was something that we never had access before in our data. We suspected it was there, but for some reason, when adults asked that question, children didn't feel confident voicing that criticism. With regards to your second question, can those tools be used? Yes, they can be used in any way you like, so much so that actually once the tools were explained, and I made an effort to explain those tools in a way that did not relate to any specific question for the evaluation, but were just in general. So we would use it to describe, you know, I would give an example of describe it as evaluate your dinner or something. And then the children could take those tools and use them to their own liking, so much so that the snails that I showed earlier, they were often used in different ways. So they used it to ask about empowerment, but also ask about the level of satisfaction with the program. So they took the tools and owned them and applied them in the way that they felt was most appropriate. And they're actually quite good at choosing the right tools for the right questions. But that was part of handing over responsibility and leadership to them. You give them the tools and then you let them make the choices that they feel are appropriate. I see that Bob has his hand up.
Yes, yes, Bob. We can hear from Bob. Welcome.
Thank you. I wanted just to know if the changes that they reported about, first of all, if they were categorized under child-focused changes of outcomes, program outcomes. How did the children kind of separate a line between which change is good for them and which is not of course, it's their right to tell you what is good for them and what is not, but did you find that what they reported as good for them or good changes are actually related to the outcomes that we expect or that we desire for children? And then two, I'd actually asked, what kind of information did you access that you didn't have access to? Yeah, because you said that you accessed information that you couldn't access. What kind and what examples of information did you get to help us to understand more? Thank you.
Certainly. So in terms of if the outcomes are good, but we assume are good for them, there was in general some alignment. The areas where there wasn't that much alignment was the focus on girls and gender. So whereas everyone agreed that it's important for girls to attend school, they also felt that it was important for boys as well. And the focus particularly on girls retention, girls attendance was something that wasn't entirely intuitive in the context of Cambodia, and particularly in these areas, because right from the beginning, in these areas, there was higher attendance and higher enrollment of girls, whereas boys were the ones that were dropping out more out of school. And so that tension between those, our focus on we want girls to stay in school and have good educational outcome, nobody disputed that, everyone agreed with that. But the fact that we were focusing much more on girls than on boys was less than intuitive, not only for the boys who were involved in the evaluation, but also for all of our respondents, and in general for the communities. That was a very fair observation, that actually, we focus a lot on girls, but boys also have challenges. But there was never a case of children having ambitions for outcomes that are very different from what we would deem to be good. There would be discussions on perhaps what is related or not related to the program, but otherwise, no, that wasn't really not really so much of an issue. And in terms of what information did we access that we didn't access otherwise, as I said, we accessed different voices from the respondent in relation to the teacher's competence was an example. Respondents felt much more confident voicing their criticisms of adults in front of other children asking them their questions, rather than in front of adults asking those questions. Any additional questions that you have? I think we're running out of time, but any additional questions that you have, you do have my email. Do send me an email, happy to respond to those. Anyone who's interested, wants to know more, wants some help in trying piloting it, absolutely welcome to get in touch. And thank you very much for your attention today. It's been really fantastic and very stimulating. Over to you, Julius.
Julius?
He's on mute, yeah.
Sorry, I was speaking while on mute. I was saying, thank you very much, Laura, for the great presentation. Participants have shared their appreciation, thanking you for the great presentation. And we all are thankful for the great insights that we have got from your presentation and sharing of your experiences. Thank you very much. And now let us welcome closing remarks from Udeshka. Udeshka is the co-leader, EvalYouth Sri Lanka, team leader, SLEvA, Eval Indigenous team. Welcome.
Thank you, Julius. We have come to the end of a very interesting session, and we enthusiastically embrace this opportunity to thank Mr. Amal Bandara, Assistant Treasurer, Sri Lanka Evaluation Association. Mr. Amal has given us the opening remarks with the value and importance of having, training, and enhancing child evaluators. We would like to express our gratitude to our speaker, Ms. Laura Hughston, MNE expert and consultant in development and humanitarian programs, for disseminating her knowledge and experiences on importance of having children to evaluate the programs. Further, she pointed out the importance of building the skills and capacities of children to evaluate a program and ethical considerations of having children and as evaluators. Moreover, we would like to thank Mr. Julius M Limbitu, CEO of Evaluation Society of Kenya, for moderating this webinar greatly. Before we close, it will be remiss of us if we fail to recognize that many persons and organizations that would have contributed to making this webinar a success. We would like to thank Mr. Asela Kalugampitiya, President, SLEvA and APEA, for his enormous support. Further, we wish to thank Sri Lanka Evaluation Association, Center for Evaluation, University of Sri Jayewardenepura, APEA, EvalYouth Sri Lanka, APC Hub, and Eval4Action for organizing this event. We wish to express our thanks to our organizing team and participants, and we'll look forward to see you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Udeshka. Next slide. Yes, the third APEA conference and Eval Fest 2022. Towards a vibrant evaluation ecosystem, creativity, collaboration, and convergence. The registration is open for this third APEA conference and Eval Fest 2022. This will be on 21st to 25th February. The contacts are given there, where we can reach out and get more information. Thank you very much. We appreciate everyone for making time to attend to this webinar. And presenter, the facilitator, thank you very much. To all of us, thank you for investing time looking at how children are a great potential in evaluation. Thank you. And bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.